I'd like to take this time to thank our sponsor, RX Smart Gear. Dave and his team have developed the perfect jump rope to counter common performance miscues, which in turn enhance the learning experience. They have an ergonomic grip and a swivel connection for better accuracy, and the resistance levels have helped with better timing. And the custom sizes promote proper form and technique. It's built durable to stand up to the rigors of intense workouts, and it was in fact prescribed to help you get better. That's how the RX Smart Gear jump rope was born. Dave Newman and his team have been a great partner for us in the podcast, and we appreciate him so much for all of his support. So don't forget to use the Clydesdale 15 discount code at checkout and get 15% off your order at rxsmartgear.com. And don't forget that that excludes new releases and special editions.
We are so excited to now have Mobility Movement as a partner. Their holistic approach to recovery is second to none. This is not just a program that helps with your flexibility and mobility, it also assists with stress release and sleep, two key factors in overall recovery. The website gives you a plan for each week, saves your favorites, gives you sleep protocols, has a specific protocol for your first week joining, and then there are these new things called Open Snacks, which are super cool. Here you are given quick warm-ups and cool-down protocols for the open WODs, featuring elite athletes Allison Scudds and Saxon Panchik. And who doesn't need recovery after those open workouts? The extensive library available to you is both vast and diverse. If you want to try Mobility Movement, go to mobilitymovement.com. That is mobilitymvmnt.com. And make sure you use our code Clydesdale20, all caps, to get 20% off your first 6 months. That's mobilitymovement.com, mobilitymvmnt.com. Use code Clydesdale20 to get 20% off your first 6 months. I've been using this since the first of the year, and I am sleeping better than I have in so many years. And with all the back issues I've had over the last 5 years, this has given me so much relief, and I'm able to work out 4 to 5 times a week without any pain at all. So go to mobilitymovement.com. That's mobilitymvmnt.com and use Clydesdale20 to get 20% off your first 6-month subscription. All right, we are live right here with Kelly Stone, one of our friends on the Clydesdale Fitness and Friends. I also have my co-host Charlie with me, or as we call him, Mr. Mobility.
That's right.
Hello.
So Kelly, this is your third appearance on our show. We're so excited to have you back.
Yep. So happy to be here. You guys, I think we're still one of my very first podcasts and one of my favorites to date. So I'm excited to be back.
Awesome. So you were one of our first ever guests. So I may touch on a few things we touched on back then because we have way more listeners now than we did back on like episode 22 or whatever it was you were on. We're now on 256.
Wow. That's so cool.
So, so if you don't know, Kelly is a 2-time CrossFit Games participant in the team division, TEAM division, with CrossFit Omnia.
Yep.
And she's also a belly flop champion. She was a state champion gymnast in high school. She was a Division I college swimmer. And because she just likes to overachieve with everything, academics were through the roof. She's a doctor of physical therapy and now trying to make the CrossFit Games as an individual.
That is correct.
We always say that you're like the most overachieving guest we've ever had.
I just like to do all the things, and it's a little overwhelming at times, but it's just always been ingrained in me to do that.
And we didn't even mention that you are best friends with The Rock and competed on the Titan Games.
I did. That was a whirlwind, and I think that was right around the time that we first talked because I remember I couldn't chat about it, and you were asking me questions, and I was like, "Oh no!" panicking on the inside.
Yeah. So what I want to touch on now is when we first met you, you were just kind of getting into the individual side of CrossFit. So I'm looking at some numbers from last couple seasons, and last year in the quarterfinals, you finished 106th in North America, went on to the West Coast Classic and finished 8th in a very, very stacked semifinal. That qualified you for the last chance qualifier where you went on to compete there. So I want to look back at that season just a little bit. Did any of your finishes surprise you, or did you expect to do that well, or even maybe a little bit more?
Last year was really the first year I felt like I could get my feet wet in an individual season. COVID kind of threw a wrench in things. I was planning to try to go individual starting in 2020, and then things kind of went awry. So, 2019 or 2021, it was like, okay, time to see what I can do. I think I've mentioned before, I don't feel like quarterfinals last year was a super accurate representation of my abilities. So I think a lot of people were surprised at the improvement, if you will, from quarterfinals to semis. But in all honesty, I was a disaster at quarterfinals last year. There's a lot of mental hurdles during that weekend of competing that I have targeted tremendously, and we can talk more about that through some sports psychology and things. But I was so excited just to get on to the next phase, to just have a fresh start and show what I could do. So going into semifinals, I won't lie to you and say I wasn't looking at that field and going, holy moly, this is stacked. Like, how am I going to compare against these people? I really didn't know. All I could say is, hey, I'm an athlete, I'm competitive, I'm going to show up and do my best. And I was really proud of what I did that competition. And I don't know if I can say I was surprised, but I was happy to feel like I showed my abilities and that I was able to kind of stack up against some of the most amazing athletes in the sport.
So I was lucky enough to be at West Coast Classic last year, and you opened the competition by basically kicking in the door. That first event, and I wish I could have seen you in the top heat.
I know.
You were in the first heat, and you were so far in front of everybody. And it was it was a ladder.
Snatch ladder.
A snatch ladder, and you were crushing everyone. What do you wish you could have been in that top heat as well?
I think looking back, it was a good opportunity for me just to, I'm still kind of playing mentally with quarterfinals kind of in the back of my head. And so I think, honestly, as much as I would have loved to be in that last heat, it was a good start for me just to kind of as a confidence builder, just to go in, to stay in my lane, do what I needed to do to start off the competition strong. And it was like, okay, like I'm here to play. I think I have a little bit different mindset going into this season, and it's obviously a bigger advantage being around that group. And I wonder if I had some more, individuals in the top heat around me, if that would have maybe even pushed me a little bit further in that event. But it was one of the most memorable events of my life, just being able to go in, hit everything, and just feel really strong and confident. So all said and done, I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think what it did is it gave everyone notice that you weren't meant to be in that bottom heat, that you were meant to be in a higher heat, and you were followed the rest of the weekend. So you finished that competition in 8th place, which is 3 spots out of the games. But starting in the first heat and then ending up in 8th place was a huge jump. And I talked to you briefly after that, and you qualified for last chance, but there was some trepidation about that because you live in altitude. So what does that mean? To explain it to our listeners that there's a disadvantage for those athletes who live in Colorado or in Vegas, where they have to train at altitude and compete in these online qualifiers in altitude.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I like to acknowledge, but realize that there's no point whining about it most of the time. I would say notoriously myself and, even my team competing at, CrossFit Omnia, we always tend to do better in person. And I think a big piece of that is the altitude factor. I think I'm hyper aware to it because as a swimmer for USA Swimming, we were given time accommodations for swimming at altitude. So anything over, let's say 100 meters, you were given a time adjustment for qualifying for things like nationals and those things. So that's something you're looking at as short as maybe a 2-minute event. So if you're doing a 20-minute AMRAP at 5,000 feet plus, like, it is quite a big disadvantage. So ultimately, I feel like it balances out, because when I go compete at places that are not quite so high, it's definitely an advantage. I think I'm able to, not that it necessarily feels easier at lower levels, but just my output ends up being more. You know, I go to Wadapalooza. There's a reason why I feel like my team, every year we go to Wadapalooza, we tend to do okay in the qualifier and then really excel once we get down there. And it's like, because you just have this like extra gear that you don't necessarily have up here. So I'm adjusted. I've lived here, but it's just hard to maintain the same level of output as if you are competing at sea level or something equivalent to that.
So you didn't fare as well in the last chance qualifier, and then we move on to this season. You made a considerable jump in quarterfinals, and I'm glad you brought up that there were adjustments made, because it may explain why last year you were 106th in North America. This year you're 27th.
Yeah, a lot of things changed this season, and it's been a wild ride, but I'm excited for it.
So what all did you do to get better? First of all, I'm assuming that there was a debrief from last season.
Sure. Yep. So I have a coach that I worked with for a long time, and we sat down right after last season and kind of just laid it all out there, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think one of the biggest things we realized is neither of us felt like I was really set up for success kind of going into quarterfinals. I think because it was a new phase, nobody really knew what to expect. And I know I personally was thinking it would be a lot more open, like, if you will, and a lot less higher skill, higher volume, which it ended up being. And, you know I'm not alone in that. And it's whatever they decide. I think that's ultimately a good way to gauge that stage. But I just didn't feel like I had trained at that point in my season for that amount of volume. So I remember being very caught off guard when quarterfinals came around. I also feel like last season I put too much emphasis on the open, and it's hard not to, because I think we're programmed to think that stage, it matters. We're competitive. You want to put your best foot forward. But ultimately, one of the biggest things we decided is the open really doesn't matter. And if you are stressing yourself out starting that early in the season, by the time you get to semifinals, and honestly, I feel like I held it together through semifinals, and I got to the weekend of the last chance qualifier and I was so burnt out, like just mentally, and not even physically exhausted, just mentally exhausted, because I had been stressing myself out so much since January through that June time period. It's just a long time. And I think that actually ended up being July. So it's a long time to put that amount of stress. And I'm a very anxious, high anxiety person. So, we rehashed kind of the season. What things do I need to get better at? One big one for me has been running. That was my only, I would say, really poor finish at West Coast Classic was the ruck run. And I gave it everything I got. Like, that was not for lack of trying. It just wasn't there. So that has been a huge emphasis point for me this season. We have structured my season a lot differently in terms of strength cycles and endurance, and allowing my body to rest and recovery during the off season, and then really start to ramp on volume quite a bit earlier, so that when quarterfinals rolled around, I didn't feel like I was getting demolished by the volume. I would say honestly quite the opposite. And beyond that, I think the other big change this year has been I started sports psychology to work on some of the mental aspects of training and competing that were hindering me last season.
So you bring up the ruck run, which brings up curiosity in my head. It was hot in Vegas during the West Coast Classic, and hot is an understatement, like 115, 118 degrees, I think. They moved that to a very early morning run. How much of that was mental, and how much of it was the actual physical in the heat and the rucks themselves?
Yeah, that was, I would say, probably in my top 3 most challenging events that I've ever done. And I think it was a combo of factors. You know, we knew the event in advance, but we didn't know that we were going to be holding a sandbag in addition to having the ruck backpack. So when I practiced it with the backpack run, like they did that event at the games. And so there was just a lot of compounding factors. You know, it was great that they moved it earlier in a sense because we got about, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 10 degrees cooler, but it was not cool. Even at 6 or 7 a.m. when we ran. And so that compounding with, you know, having to like hold a bag on your shoulders. I don't know if you've ever done that for 4 miles, but it's brutal. And then I just remember kind of getting about to this halfway point and just like, I just was not there anymore. And I think like I kept looking for water. I didn't see the water anywhere. They said there was going to be water and I'm sure it was somewhere, but I was not all there. And by that last lap, it was literally everything I got. I think at one point almost ran into one of the barricades. I felt like my vision was going. And there's a funny YouTube clip. I think I have it on my Instagram still of me coming in at that final last stretch. And there's a group of people behind me and I'm like, oh shoot, you know, my glasses fall off. I'm trying to run, but it looks more like a waddle at that point. And, you know, I got across the finish line and my coach was like, I can't even be mad because like you did literally everything you could. It probably took me 2 hours to feel normal after that. Like I was sitting on a bike, shoveling carbs and electrolytes down my throat. He had like wet towels all over me. And I was like half convinced that I was done. Like I was just not going to be able to keep plugging along. So it was brutal. Definitely advantage if you've been able to train in that type of heat and climate, I will say.
What was it like having to come into the arena to switch out your ruck bags and then go back out into the heat?
Yeah, it just was not pleasant. I felt like you could just never, you know, it was like that glimmer of like, oh, that feels nice. You get that little refresh, but then you're just right back out into it. And it was just brutal. I don't know how else to put it. And
It
everybody
took out
went
a
out
lot
so
of people.
hot. Yeah, and everybody just went out so hot. Like I remember that first lap, I'm looking down at my watch, seeing a 6-something minute pace, and I'm just going, oh no, this is way too fast, you know. But everybody was just going out hot, and then people started dropping like flies. So, I mean, it was definitely rough.
When it goes to show you, like training in that, Bethany was almost unaffected.
Yeah, she looked
She
cool
beat
as a
everybody
cucumber.
except for like 2 of the men.
Yep, cool as a cucumber.
Yeah, and that's what she trains in every day. So yeah. Okay, so you work with a sports psychologist. What did you learn most in that time?
So it's been an ongoing process. Still, I actually talked to her this week, but I think the biggest thing is that just acknowledging the impact of other stressors in my life and how that impacts my training and competing. So I have a lot on my plate. I like to be 100% in every aspect of my life, and I've had to acknowledge that I simply can't do that. And if this is something that's important to me, I've got to sacrifice some other things and set some more boundaries in my life and make some intentional time to take care of myself. So I feel like that's honestly been the biggest factor is just cutting out some extraneous things, cutting out some extraneous stressors, making some intentional time for myself, and then focusing on some very concrete ways to stay present and calm when I'm competing. So I am not somebody that on the competition floor, especially when it's like an online qualifier, but I don't like to be really riled up. I am not one of these like, let's go, getting, you know, super anxious. Like that generally leads to me either going out too hot or making a mistake or just not performing to the best of my abilities. So we talk about, and I talk about this with my coach a lot, this like optimal arousal points. Like, yes, I want to be, you know, energetic. I want to be focused, but it's this like calm confidence. It's not this like jittery, blah, 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 like over the top feeling that I think a lot of people think is helpful and actually isn't helpful for someone like me.
So you are still fully practicing your physical therapy, right?
Yep. I still see about
and how much
third. Yeah.
And how do you figure out that balance?
You know, it's tricky. I do the best I can. You know, at this point, I still see 30 to 35 patients a week. It's a combination of pediatrics as well as some adult ortho patients for my own side practice. I also manage a clinical team, and I have a PT assistant that I supervise now. So there's a lot of things in that regard. And then I also do some nutrition coaching and run some 8-week challenge type stuff around that. So balance is hard. That's probably the single biggest thing that I struggle with, is finding balance in my life, not feeling guilty about not being present and on 100% of the time, because I feel this obligation to get back to people. And even, when it comes to things like social media, that I've really spent some time and energy building up as sort of a business tool. And I just hit these times where I just have to be okay saying, you know what, I just can't get back to everybody today, and that's okay. And I have to remind myself of that constantly.
Yeah, it blows me away that you, and this is just that point that you are an overachiever, like that you have all of that, plus you're a nutrition coach, plus all of that. So let me ask you this: as a nutrition coach, how has that helped you be an athlete? Because you live day to day coaching people on how to fuel their body, and now you have to follow those same practices.
Yeah, nutrition has played such an important role in my whole career in CrossFit. And I look back, I think we talked about briefly, but in between college swimming and starting CrossFit, I did some bodybuilding shows, which ended up not being my cup of tea, but it sparked my interest in nutrition because I felt so debilitated by the lack of food that I was given for that sport. And that's kind of part of the process. But I remember starting CrossFit eating 15 to 1600 calories and thinking that was a lot, because I came off of eating 7 to 1100 calories doing bodybuilding stuff. So it took a long time for me to realize, hey, I definitely need more fuel than this. This isn't quite cutting it. And I worked with a nutrition coach for close to 2 years to be able to gradually increase me calorie wise, to give me an understanding of how to fuel my body correctly. And, got me to a point where I feel pretty comfortable now of listening to my body and knowing kind of what my body needs. So it's been amazing now that I eat, 3,000 plus calories a day. I'll even adjust from there based on how I'm feeling. And people think like, oh, she's so lucky that she gets to eat that much. But what they don't realize is that took years of gradual increases. I also train 3 to 4 hours a day. And so just having that understanding for myself, I think fueled this desire to want to help others with their nutrition. And, I'm constantly telling people, this is not a quick fix plan. I am not here. I want to help you see results, but I am not going to be your person that gives you a 1,200 calorie diet and a quick fix plan that you're going to fall off the bandwagon in 2 to 3 months. So I think some people get impatient with me at times because I am on the other side of the spectrum. I look at that long-term plan. I really encourage, trying to be strong and focus on other things outside of just the scale. Like that's one factor, but not necessarily the most important one. And I try always to lead by example. So if I'm saying, hey, you need to be consistent, you've got to drink your water, you've got to prioritize sleep, you've got to hit your protein, I try to, again, lead by example and show those things in my daily life, even when I'm busy, and just say, you know what, if it's important to you, you'll find a way and you'll get it done.
I feel like I'm bouncing all over the place, but there's so many things I want to talk to you about. So I think that's the hardest thing, right? You were a gymnast for 14 years, and I know gymnasts notoriously are not eating a lot of calories in a day.
Yep.
And then you do the bodybuilding, so that reinforces it. And then you're trying to eat a lot of calories. I've been on a weight loss battle for years.
Yep.
I do not eat enough in a day. And it is the biggest struggle for me because it seems so counterintuitive to what I want to do. And I struggle to get my calories in a day. And it's because I have this like focus issue when I'm working on something like a podcast or editing or coming up with ideas. Like I get so laser focused, I forget to eat.
Yep. Very common.
Yeah. And so like I can appreciate like trying to get from 700 calories to 3,000. I'm struggling to get 2,300 in.
Yeah, and then you're not alone in that. And I think exactly what you're saying, it's so counterintuitive. You know, I will give people, let's say, 1900 calories, and then they're like, well, I had 1500 every day this week, so that's good, right? That means that I'll lose weight faster. And it just doesn't usually work like that, because the repercussions of underfueling tend to mean we're not moving as much, we have less energy, we don't have as much energy for workouts, our sleep kind of goes down. And especially I work with a lot of females where the impact on hormones can be tremendous. So it's this constant battle of saying, eat more, I promise you'll lose more weight in the long run. But it sounds crazy. It's still not, I would say, streamlined in society in terms of doing that. And I think, you know, I wish that we had better food education, you know, growing up, that like we actually learned how to structure a plate and how to, you know, fuel ourselves correctly. So it wasn't something that a lot of us are learning later in life. It's a hard change to make. And, you know, it takes a lot of pre-planning and, you know, making it a priority. And I mean, I am 100% the person who will come home from work at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and I'm shoveling 1,500 calories down my throat, and it is not enjoyable. Like, I know people think that eating a lot of food is fun, but when you're trying to get it mostly from whole food sources and you have a busy schedule, it's not always pleasant.
Yeah, well, my friend Charlie here, he doesn't know what a vegetable is.
No.
Charlie.
No.
And
Right?
he's got a six pack, which is just so frustrating to me.
Frustrating. Yep.
They're donuts, right?
Donuts, oh man, yeah. Yeah, and it's all the things. I think that's one thing I emphasize, is that everything matters. And maybe that's overwhelming to people, but if you are eating, let's say, in a calorie deficit, you're doing everything perfect on your diet, but you are not sleeping enough and you're not managing stress, you are not going to see the results that you want. So sleep matters, hydration matters, getting micronutrients, which is what we get from those fruits and veggies, you know, all of those things matter. And so, I mean, to me, that's like an exciting perspective. Like, there are so many factors that we can tackle to get you the best possible results. And you don't have to be perfect with any of them, but you do have to be consistent enough across the board and prioritize those things to be able to really make a difference, I think, with what you're doing.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me to your Instagram post, I think from this morning, where you were sitting on a foam roller and you said that you had a very unpopular opinion, which really broke my heart, because I have Normatec boots, I have a Theragun.
And they're great. I'm not saying they're bad. But yeah, there's just such an emphasis, and it's such a marketing ploy of recovery equals X, Y, and Z fancy tool. And don't get me wrong, I love Normatec boots. You know, I use different massage equipment. I have, you know, I like to use infrared saunas, and they all have a positive role in recovery. But if you are ignoring the basics, it's like the elephant in the room. It's like you're tackling, you know, this X 2-3% of recovery when sleep, hydration, nutrition are all sitting up here. So I always say, when people ask me, what do you do for recovery? I sleep a lot. Like, sleep is the one thing. I'm very passionate about sleep. I could talk to you about sleep for hours. But, you know, sleep, hydration, nutrition, like 100% biggest factors when it comes to recovery.
So with all you do, if someone looked at your day schedule, they would think this woman never sleeps.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it is the number one priority in your life.
Yep. It is the ongoing joke. You can ask people who know me really well. I am a funny sleeper. I have a lot of sleeping quirks, but I take my sleep very seriously.
Yeah, I'm trying to get better at that. I've actually had a back issue that wakes me up at night, and I'm getting that fixed. And so I've gone from like 3 to 4 hours to 7.
Yeah.
And now I'm having one more procedure, hoping to get to 8 to 9.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things I've realized, and I think I knew this deep down, but Whoop, I started using Whoop about maybe 3 months ago, that has really become apparent to me is, at least and I think this is pretty true across the board, get about an hour less sleep than the time I spend in bed. So a lot of people tell me, hey, I sleep 7 hours a night. And I'm like, you're probably getting 6 hours of sleep because you're in bed for 7. So, and I'm somebody who also has a very good sleep routine. You know, I wear blue light blockers at nights. I try to limit electronics before bed. You know, I feel like I do a lot of the right things when it comes to preparing for sleep. And I still get about an hour less sleep than the time I spend in bed. So realistically, if you're trying to maximize, hormones and recovery, we really need to be at minimum at that 7 hours mark. And I would say for me, my body needs a consistent 8 hours of actual sleep a night, sometimes more. So, what that just requires for me is, yes, I do not have a typical 9 to 5 job. I think a lot of people especially look at my Instagram and think this girl just works out all day. And it's just, that's what I choose to show you. And I'm just very efficient with my time outside of the gym.
Do you still use a weighted blanket?
I do still use my weighted blanket. I even have a travel case. I travel with my weighted blanket. It will definitely be with me at semis.
So you also talked about hydration. Are you a big hydro juggish person, or are you?
I go through my waves. I've definitely done that in the past, but right now I have like just a 40 ouncer that I carry around with me, fill it up a couple times a day. I try to always start my day with a big glass of water before my coffee. So that's my motivation to kind of get it in there. And then I also drink a ton of water, usually with electrolytes and carbs during my workouts. So I would say that's another thing that I've really kind of keyed in on this year and learned a lot about is electrolyte balance and salt. I'm very passionate about salt these days as an athlete and the impact that it has on performance. But yeah, again, all of those things matter. I would say I'm very consistently getting a gallon of water in a day because I have to.
Well, before we get back on track with this season, I have to, one story from the West Coast Classic I have to tell. And that is I ran into you at the airport on the way out of Vegas. And your mom made me feel like the biggest rock star in the world.
My mom, that's so funny.
She came running over to me. Oh my gosh, it's the Clydesdale. And I just felt like a rock star, and she is so cute. And it was like the highlight of my weekend.
I love that. She will absolutely be listening to this podcast, so she'll get a kick out of that. But yeah, I cannot speak highly enough about my mom and dad. They are truly my number one fans. Nobody could ever compare. And my mom and dad, they listen to absolutely everything that I do. They're, watching. My mom and I joke because she reads every Instagram post, every comment. So I always laugh when I get all these negative comments sometimes, and I'm like, I wonder if they know that my mom and dad are reading everything. But yeah, that's so sweet.
Does she react and comment back to people?
I keep joking that I'm like, Mom, you should be my social media manager because she'll get upset with me if I don't respond to comments, and I have to sometimes tell her that, Mom, I physically do not have the mental capacity today to do that, and it's not that I don't want to. I'm just exhausted. So, but I've just joked. I'm like, you should be my social media manager, Mom. You can go through and respond to all my comments. But yeah, she definitely is there, and she knows what's going on every step of the way.
So the flip side of that story is I go to the same hairdresser all the time, and she works out. She doesn't do CrossFit, but it's like a boot camp type workout style. And I went in like 2 months ago to get my hair cut, and she goes, she knows I do this podcast. And she's like, do you know Kelly Stone? And I said, what? Like, where did that come from? And she goes, oh my gosh, I follow her on Instagram. She's my biggest inspiration. That chick is a badass.
That's so sweet. I love hearing those stories because social media is such a weird place. Like it's opened so many doors for me. I feel like I've been able to interact and meet and connect with so many amazing people. And I hear these stories, like that truly bring me joy. And so that makes it worth it and kind of offsets some of the negative side.
Yeah.
As much as I try not to let affect me, I'm human, and sometimes it's just brutal, the things that you see. So, but yeah, thanks for sharing that.
So this year you do really well in quarters, and you have been assigned to the Granite Games up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Are you excited about that, or were you hoping for somewhere else?
I'm excited. I tried to, because we didn't really have a say, try to not get too attached to any one idea. I would say my only kind of reservation hesitation about that location is that it was just all outside last year, and I'm kind of wishfully thinking maybe it won't all be, but I do replay little bits of the ruck run and being outside and watching Granite games and how hot it was. So crossing my fingers that it's either not all outside or we get some cooler temperatures. But yeah, I think one thing with CrossFit, you can't really get attached to anything, and you kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you do. So I'm excited to be one of the later weekends. I think that's helpful also.
Yeah, I don't think it's normal to be in the high 90s in Minnesota, ever.
Yeah,
But it was brutal. It was brutal there. I'm not optimistic for out or for indoor because I didn't even see an indoor facility.
Yeah,
when we were there.
Wishful thinking.
But there was nothing long.
Yeah.
The only run was around the stadium.
Yeah.
So they were short runs.
I'll be interested to see if that shifts this year, because I know that Granite Games got a lot of flack for that, that it didn't really seem like a very well-rounded test as compared to some of the other ones. I know they are doing, CrossFit is outlining 2 events that will be at all of the semifinals. So I think that's an interesting change this year. So I'll be very interested to see what happens as far as length of events.
Yeah, but it is a beautiful facility, and it is brand new, state of the art, really cool. And like the one hotel is right there on the grounds. All you have to do is walk around a pond to get to the stadium. And that's super cool. But I do have to bring up that there have been some shifts in the lineups, and Granite Games was affected pretty heavily, where three members of the were moved from Atlas Games to the Granite Games. I have publicly stated how unfair I think that is. You do not have to make a political statement here if you do not wish to, but if you do have a reaction, what was that to that situation?
Yeah, I will be honest that I have been working through a lot of emotional reactions to that in particular this week. It's what prompted some sports psychology this week. And I think ultimately where my reaction comes from is just disappointment in how CrossFit as an organization is handling the semifinal seeding process. It's no fault of the athletes for their choices. I'm not somebody that thinks whether you have a vaccine or not, or whether you have a passport or not, like I don't think that those are decisions that people should be forced one way or the other. But I think that if CrossFit is choosing to accommodate for those things, that's something that very easily could have been targeted pre-seeding. And so if you are going to move, let's say, a top seed into another semifinal that already has a very stacked field, that the least you could do is see if another top seed would be willing to shift. I will say publicly, I have sent a response to CrossFit asking for consideration to be moved to Atlas Games, saying that I would be more than willing to do that. And I've yet to receive any response back. So to me, that's disappointing. That it just gives the air that CrossFit is playing favorites and isn't being cognizant of the impact of their actions on the athlete pool as a whole. So I'm not asking for special treatment. All I'm asking is for a fair shot at qualifying. And at this point, I don't feel like I have that.
Yeah. All of these were known issues prior to seeding. So there's no excuse that this is happening after the fact.
Yep.
I agree with you that everybody is entitled to their opinion on what they want to do with their own body, whether they want to be vaccinated or not. And there are more serious situations going on that are not vaccinated related, that have not been dealt with, that were known issues before the seeding, and the people are left in limbo. So
yes.
This is a cluster that did not have to happen because all of these were known prior to seeding.
Yeah. So it's like at minimum, let's be consistent in making athlete accommodations. Just as you said, there are several athletes who are very well known to be, having difficulty leading the country and coming back. And if you're not going to provide accommodation for them, then why are we accommodating others? And again, it gives the air of prioritizing kind of your top names, your golden children in the sport. And it really is disheartening as like an athlete who has really sacrificed a lot to just have a fair shot. And that's all I can kind of come back to.
Yeah.
So.
And I'll point out that last year, Amanda Barnhart and Fisa Gaffi were at the MAC, and this year they're at the Granite Games. So last year they got Tia put in their semifinal. This year they get Mal put in their semifinal. Those two should be launching protests all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think, going back, it didn't affect me directly, but I would have been very upset at that situation last year. I think that in all fairness, if you're going to make those shifts, add a spot to that one, or move a spot. If you look at the breakdown now of Granite Games versus, let's say, Atlas Games, and there's phenomenal athletes across the board, but it's not an even spread right now, and it's not taking into account that you have several athletes who maybe didn't have the highest quarterfinals placing, but have been to the games numerous times. A Danny Spiegel and Emily Rolfe, like, they are serious contenders. So it's just the whole picture just leaves a little bit of a sour taste. And, I'm working through it, because ultimately if they choose not to acknowledge or make any adjustments, I've got to accept the fact that this is what it is, and dwelling on it isn't going to be productive for the rest of my training. So.
Well, as one of your biggest fans, I still think you will do fine at the Granite Games, and I'll be rooting for you there.
Thank you.
And it is a beautiful facility. I think it's a perfect place for you. Last year, it was the surprise region, or the surprise semifinal, and everybody there did well at the games. Yeah. So hoping that more surprises are in store.
I'm excited. I'm just crossing my fingers for a handstand walk event. Like, just I want like one just knock it out of the park event. So either they need to come up with a pool somewhere, or I'll take a handstand walk.
A pool. Yeah. So that's actually in my notes. You have all these really cool posts of these handstands that you do freestanding. Is that something you were natural at, or did it take years of being a gymnast?
I felt like I picked handstands up pretty quickly as a young gymnast. I look back at pictures and stuff, and I was like a pretty jacked 5 and 6 year old. Like, I started training pretty competitively from 4 years old on. And, I think that when people look now at, the discipline and work ethic that I have, it's hard to develop that later in life. I think absolutely, but I didn't do that. I've been doing that my entire life. I worked with some amazing but very strict Russian and Ukrainian coaches. And so I just developed this work ethic from a very early age. I, did a ton of strength training, and I was always, I think, pretty skilled early on at handstand stuff. So now I've kind of made it a point to just maintain those things as much as I can. My brother will just offhandedly always ask, "Oh, can you still do a straddle, a press handstand?" And so as long as I've convinced myself that as long as I can still do a press handstand from sitting, I'm not that old and I've still got it. So I try to do them every, week or two, just to like maintain that skill.
So that leads me to a couple different avenues. One, what do you hope you see at Granite? Is it just a straight out handstand walk, or handstand push-ups, or which do you prefer?
Anything on my hands is preferable, but I do love a good handstand walk. If you guys follow the Wadapalooza events from this, season, we had an event that was basically like a sandbag carry, handstand walks, and we also had some burpees in there, and my team ended up winning that event, which was just so fun. But I think that's probably the area that I excel the most. Could be an obstacle course or just a standard handstand walk. But really any of those gymnastic skills, toes to bar, handstand push-ups, trick handstand push-ups are definitely events that I like to see.
So the Olympic lifting, did it come late for you, or have you always been good at that?
No, that was really the only thing that I had no experience with when I started CrossFit in 2016. Even through college swimming, all of our strength and conditioning coaches were CrossFitters. So while we didn't do things like kipping pull-ups or Olympic lifting, a lot of the metabolic conditioning style of CrossFit was something that I was pretty used to doing. So that was kind of implemented early. So Olympic lifting came later. and has been something that's been a little, I would say, slower to develop. But at this point, I think one of my biggest strengths as an athlete is I'm pretty well-rounded. So, kind of going back to your other question, handstand walks, absolutely. But really what I'm looking for is just a well-rounded test. I think I fare well when there's a lot of variety, a lot of things that maybe poke at weaknesses that other individuals might have. So, outside of, let's say, that running piece, I think that I've pretty much knocked down a lot of those weaknesses, especially over the last year or two.
Okay, so I'm only going to ask like 2 more serious questions, then we're just going to get to fun stuff.
Okay.
You mentioned that you were a jacked 5 and 6-year-old, but I also read in something that you wrote, and I can't remember what it was for, but that you had some self-confidence issues because of being a muscular child.
I did. It's just like, I feel like social media is brutal now as an adult. Kids can be kind of ruthless too, growing up when you're a little bit different. And, I was that child. I was going to multiple practices a day. I was always kind of bigger and stronger, especially than a lot of the boys. And, I look back now and I know it was them being, self-conscious. And, I shouldn't I shouldn't be affected by that. But, as a young girl, I was, I had a lot of boys coming at me like, oh, let's arm wrestle, or let me see your muscles. And, it did affect me for a long time. And I'm not sure when I really made that switch of just kind of getting past it, but I do have very distinct memories growing up of just feeling like, oh, that didn't make me feel very good, and just being a little bit self-conscious of that.
When you've done a very good job of keeping yourself in a community where that is accepted.
Absolutely. It's something I love so much about CrossFit. It just attracts a certain type of person, and there's such a bigger emphasis on your effort and what you can do and, bettering yourself. And it's so much less on, let's try to be the skinniest, smallest version of yourself. And I think that's so powerful, especially as a female. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that really draws me to a sport like CrossFit.
So last serious question, we've said you're an overachiever. How much planning do you put into your post-competitive career as to what it's going to be, or are you just living in the moment?
I, at present, am just living in the moment. I've had a couple side businesses, couple ideas on the horizon that I would love to pursue at some point, but I have made the decision at this point that I have no more capacity to add anything else right now. So I am focused on maintaining and optimizing what I'm already doing and just living in the ability to compete at this level of athletics. It's something that I fully acknowledge is not going to last forever. I don't know how much longer I can train at this volume. I don't know if I'm going to get hurt today or tomorrow. And so it's something I don't take for granted. But one thing I realized with myself this year is that I have the rest of my life to make money. I have the rest of my life to pursue a career. I do not have the rest of my life to compete at this level in CrossFit. And I want to take advantage of that, because I know that 6 months, a year, 2, 5 years down the line, I won't regret not having made more money or pursued something else in my professional career, but I will regret not just trying my absolute best to be the best athlete I can be right now.
All right, now for the fun stuff. So I also read somewhere that what you like to do for relaxation is travel.
I do.
So what is the best place you visited in the last couple years?
Oh man, unfortunately, I feel like COVID has really put a knock on my traveling. I've done some smaller trips around here. My parents spend, 4 to 6 months a year in Mexico, so I love to go visit them there. But I would say, one of my most amazing trips was right after grad school. I went to Europe for about a month with my brother, and we went all around, spent a week in Greece. We have some good friends in Amsterdam, and, went along the coast of Italy. And it was really such an amazing time and opportunity just to be able to do that and see some other cultures and eat all the food and do all the things. So I'm itching to do some more overseas travel, though, soon, hopefully.
So my next question was, in 4 months after you've competed at the CrossFit Games as an individual, where are you going to celebrate?
Pending COVID restrictions, I'm hopefully planning for a big trip this fall somewhere. Not sure yet. My mom and I have been really wanting to go to Egypt. That's been a big on our to-do list. And I also scuba dive. So I've been wanting to dive in the Red Sea. So
Of course,
I don't know if
scuba dive.
I don't know if it'll happen this year. We may be looking at next year for that one, but definitely will be a trip on the horizon.
Awesome. I also read that your favorite cheat meal is sushi. So what are you picking as your first sushi roll on that night?
Oh man. So what's funny is, so I used to always be a sushi roll person. And then lately I have kind of switched gears into more of like a sashimi nigiri person. So just finding places with really good quality fish. I'm a big toro person. If you've had like that fatty tuna, it's like the best thing ever. So I just want a big platter of all the salmon and tuna and just good healthy food.
Yeah, I think tuna is my favorite food now.
So
like the good tuna, not the can stuff.
Yeah.
Like the fresh tuna.
Yeah. And that's been honestly the most interesting evolution for me, just in terms of nutrition and everything, is that I really don't crave a whole lot of, crappy food. Every once in a while, I'm like, yeah, let's get pizza, let's do something. But for the most part, I'm like, I want like a good ribeye or like a good piece of tuna. I want some good, like fatty, good quality meat or fish. So that's what my body craves.
So I know you remodeled your house recently.
I did.
Are you happy with the results, or do you have more planned?
I am very happy with it. It was such a good time to buy it. I feel like I've already, seen some really great value increases, but it's been nice to have my own space. It's very comfortable. I still need to do my bathrooms. I'm planning on ripping out a bathtub and putting in a glass shower and just making some adjustments there, but just, got to find a little time to breathe. So maybe in the fall, that'll be my project for this year.
So what percentage of the remodel do you do yourself?
I was involved in every piece, but definitely not doing all of the hands-on labor. I was very fortunate to have a good friend and client, couple duo who I call my do it all, people. They helped every step of the way and helped do a lot of the work. And I'm so grateful for them. It was one of those things where I look at social media and say, okay, these were people who had reached out to me, for some nutrition coaching. I worked with one-on-one, and then after the fact, we became really good friends, and they helped with a lot of my remodel. So I definitely cannot take credit for that, but I feel like I did learn a lot along the way. And so I look at everything and I see, like my painting, and that was my dad, and my mom and I, we did my fireplace. And then, those friends that I mentioned, they did my floors and doors and door frames and kitchen. And so it's fun because everything is pretty sentimental to me at this point. So I'm going to have a hard time giving it up whenever I choose to move or sell it.
Yeah, I find that every time I finish a project, my wife then is like, well, now we have to do this to match the new stuff you just did. And I'm now 18 months into this remodel of my house. And every time I think I'm done, something else shows up on the list.
Yeah, it's so tough because especially if you pick like a color theme or a certain, type of genre of, things, you have to kind of get all the open spaces. And so I was very lucky when I did mine that I could stay at my parents' house still and just kind of do everything all at once. Like we really just ripped just about everything. So, I was lucky that I was able to do that kind of all in one go. So everything kind of matches, and it's just the bathrooms that just need a little loving.
Yeah, at least my wife doesn't like have me lay floor and then change the configuration of my kitchen. So now the floor has to be all redone.
Oh geez.
He's speechless.
Yeah. And then you get a hernia from it, and it just turns into a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. So many things that I didn't even realize, like I had some really strange ones. It's an older building. So like I had all metal doors when I moved in, and it was something I didn't notice right away. And then it was like, oh, like this is weird. We need to rip all the doors and door frames. And that was not an easy project. So yeah, it's just funny the things you come across of like, what is that? Or in my kitchen, my cabinet length was just a little bit off, about a 1/4 inch in terms of the space, So when I had sent in the dimensions, they said, oh no, you must have measured incorrectly. It should be this. And I'm like, okay. And then we show up to put my cabinets in and they don't fit. And so we ended up having to cut drywall off on the side. And it's such a, big production, but you just never know what you're going to find in construction and remodeling.
Yeah.
So,
Excuse me. So I also found an article that you were a major contributor to in Muscle and Fitness magazine.
oh yeah, that was fun.
And so how cool is it to be known as an authority in weightlifting, and you get to contribute to a piece like that?
Yeah, again, it was just another really cool thing of being involved with companies and getting exposure to where people kind of like, oh, let's see what she has to say. So I feel like any of those opportunities, it's great just to be able to hopefully put some real concrete information out there that's not some quick fix. I get so fed up with all of the just bogus that we see out there, because there's just not a whole lot of monitoring of those things. So, I try any chance I get to just put out real information of, hey, if you want to build muscle, this is what it takes. Hey, if you want to change your nutritional habits, this is what it takes. It's not some quick fix diet plan. It's not, you can just wallow away in the gym and not do anything and expect to build muscle. Like those things don't happen. It takes hard work. So I feel like that was just another avenue where I got to kind of put that information out there, hopefully.
Yeah. Awesome. And then, so the last question I have for you is, you were asked in a Q&A who you looked up to, and both of your answers were gymnasts. So it's a 2-part question. One is, you were a gymnast for 14 years. You were a state champion in high school. Do you still identify as a gymnast? And 2, are those two still the people you look up to?
Yeah, I think that one of the most defining things in my life was doing gymnastics. It took up such a big part of my life and my childhood, and it's just like ingrained in me, and I have such a love for the sport. So even now, I am a diehard Olympics watcher. I'm a diehard college gymnastics fan. My mom and I were going back and forth, about all the national championships happening last week for NCAA gymnastics. And to me, it was my first love, and I probably will never go away. So I think that again, I acknowledge that I can't do a lot of the things that I used to, but I still do identify as a gymnast. And a lot of that is, I think it just defined me so much in terms of the attributes that I have now, the work ethic, the determination, the focus. And those are things that I value because they can't be given, you have to earn them, and they're things that can't be taken away from you. So I think that impact, I look at individuals who stand up for things in that sport, and they're just people that I'm naturally drawn to. So, you look at Simone Biles and everything she's done for the sport, and just being a phenomenal athlete, amazing. Like, I don't think people can fully grasp the caliber of athlete that she is, and the things that she's been able to do are just mind-boggling. Like, I think, you watch her go up and flip 3 or 4 times, and it's like, oh, that's cool, but I don't think people have any idea how difficult that is. And then watching everything, she went through over the Olympics, and standing up for herself and her needs, when she was getting so much backlash, like I can't even imagine how difficult that was. But, as somebody who has struggled a lot with mental health and pretty severe anxiety, I think that seeing athletes like that start to really stand up and acknowledge that those are factors, and that sometimes we've got to take a back seat and take care of ourselves. I definitely look up to her still. And I think I also mentioned Ali Raisman. I was pretty profoundly impacted by all of the stuff that had happened with Larry Nassar. And, I'm grateful that I was never in an experience in my gymnastics career where I was exposed to that. But I see how easily it could have happened, and it's so heartbreaking just to hear the stories for that. And so seeing all the work that she's done to just kind of stand up, and fight for, those athletes and to give them a voice, I think was something that just has really stuck with me.
Yeah. I forgot there's 2 more questions. One is, you always compete at Wodapalooza. Is that the most fun place to compete?
It is honestly my absolute favorite. Even having been to the games and other places, those are great experiences, but there is just something about Wodapalooza, that venue, being in Miami. I always get a swimming event, which makes me happy, and it's just always a well-run, well-rounded comp, and I just have so much fun there. So, yes, absolute favorite.
Yeah, this was my first time there this year, and being able to grab a cup of coffee and go to the bayfront and just, no matter what event's going on, just have a cup of coffee, look at the ocean, and watch an event was awesome. Last question, super serious. How much power do the space buns have?
I think they are very powerful. There was something that came out for the first time at West Coast Classic, and at this point I feel like every major competition they've got to come out at some point. So we were joking, like at Wodapalooza, we had a couple, less events that we weren't super thrilled with as a team this year, and then the space buns came out, and we got an event win, and so it was just like, what, these are some powerful things.
So is it going to be like a Sunday thing, like Tiger always wore red and black on Sunday, the space buns always come out on Sunday?
I don't know. I'll have to play it by ear, maybe, but yeah, no promises. We'll see.
Yeah, you may need that power a little bit earlier in the weekend.
Yeah, I may have to have them come out earlier. They're definitely a good one for like a handstand push-up event, because then I have some extra space. I can't have my bun on my top of my head, because then it's hard to do handstand push-ups. So.
Well, Kelly, this was so much fun. Thank you for jumping on and catching up. We always appreciate you.
Yeah, so much fun as always. Thanks for having me on.